Welcome back to a live edition of the Done Deal Show. I'm joined again and very happy to welcome back to the Football Terrace, Ben Jacobs. How are you, mate?
Very well. Great to be back. I like this new interface with the hot take, you versus Goldbridge to the right as I look at it.
Yes. Mine and Mark's brand new podcast out on Spotify now, people. So go and check it out. It's
seamless.
It's a little bit of fun, actually. It's just we react to things that other people have said and done. It's football, but it's a bit more relaxed. It's, not breaking down games, not about tactics. It's just a little bit of fun. So check it out. But how have you been, mate? How have you? And I have to say again, you whether it's a jumper or a t-shirt or a football shirt, you're bringing the color today, bruv. You're bringing the color.
I don't know if you can really see, but can you guess or can you work out what this shirt is?
No. It looks like a football shirt, but I don't know what it is.
It's a training top. You could never have anything this outrageous that you actually play a match in. It's training top. It's an African nation.
Is it Cameroon?
Senegal.
Senegal, right, okay. I'll just try to work out who has yellow, green, and red. Look at that. That is nice, though. That is nice. That is very, very nice.
Yeah, I think people in the chat may be divided on it, but as they were with my jumpers too, we're in t-shirt mode though, because it's the summer window, not the winter market. So you can expect more of this kind of rascal attire in the coming shows that we do together.
And look, loads to go through today as well. Ben's got some updates. We've got some questions. We kind of set the tone ahead of what is set to be one of the biggest transfer windows maybe ever in terms of money being spent. We're going to be talking about Huijsen, Delap. I'm going to be asking about Isak as well. We're talking about Bruno Fernandes potentially going to Saudi for a record-breaking fee. We're touching on Arsenal, their pursuit of Zubimendi, Gyokeres, new manager changes, loads happening on the show. Any questions that you have, feel free to send them in. We'll prioritize the member chats and the super chats, of course, but ask some questions away. I wanted to start, if possible, with the big breaking news yesterday that's got Manchester United fans on tenterhooks right now, and that is that there could be a whopping 115, 120 million pound plus bid for Bruno Fernandes. What is the likelihood of this bid, and should Man United fans be fearful, Ben?
Not necessarily fearful. I think Al Hilal is serious. They were a year ago as well. So Bruno Fernandes is a top central and Al Hilal target, has been for quite some time. When dealmakers approached him a year ago, Bruno Fernandes was very respectful. He listened to the project. But at that point, he said he didn't want to leave Manchester United. He subsequently signed a new deal, of course. But also more broadly, he wanted to stay in Europe in the build-up to the 2026 World Cup. So if Bruno Fernandes went to Saudi, he would be U-turning on his position of 12 months ago. Al Hilal are trying. What they've done is made Bruno Fernandes, as I revealed yesterday, a 3-year non-binding offer. And the reason I say non-binding is because you almost get the offer before you even know about the offer. And what I mean by that is that Saudi bid blind, and sometimes they dump on a player or their agent or lawyer a very detailed offer via email before they've even forewarned about it. And then they hope that that becomes a point of conversation. And then usually they give you a very short period of time in which to answer. And Bruno Fernandes has been offered, subject, of course, to some kind of engagement, in the region of £65 million a year, inclusive of base wage and potential bonuses. And even though we've heard in Saudi that they're in negotiations, that things are advancing, my understanding remains that Bruno Fernandes has given no definitive answer. There's been no approach to Manchester United. So things can still be termed quite exploratory. But if Al Hilal get any indication from Bruno Fernandes that he's changed his mind and he wants to join, then they are prepared to bid somewhere in the region of a British transfer record. Now, we've heard some reports in Saudi that half that number will only be necessary and that there's a release clause in the region of £60 million. My understanding from both Al Hilal and Manchester United sources is that there is no formal release clause. Saudi deal makers believe there's kind of a threshold in which Manchester United will engage, but they're not aware of a specific number. So it's not as routine as trigger a release clause, offer Fernandes loads of money, off he goes. the expectation is still Manchester United want to keep Bruno Fernandes. There is no formal release clause, and therefore it's going to be very difficult for Al Hilal to persuade Fernandes to leave. And once again, this isn't only about the money or the Saudi project or Fernandez's age, and maybe this kind of offer doesn't come around again. It's also about that 2026 World Cup. And would it be beneficial for Bruno Fernandes, even if he wanted the move? And I have no indication yet that he does. But should he choose the money in the Saudi project, how damaging could that be for his 2026 World Cup preparation? Even though, like Ronaldo, he'll likely make the squad anyway. So that will probably be a factor as well. So yes, Al Hilal are trying, but Manchester United remain calm about the situation.
Absolutely. A lot of United fans are worried. Some see it as a good thing. Some are worried. But the Ineos will sell if the bid was 120 million and potentially use it to rebuild. And, you know, I engaged yesterday with a number of Man United fans here on the terrace and on the United stand. And, you know, if we got Cherky and Belieber with the money, would that be an improvement, etc.? From a United perspective, is it something are you getting any indication that the football club would consider selling him, or is he seen as untouchable at this point?
Well, before a window opens, I would never want to say absolutely no chance of any exit. It's the same with Alexander Isak, right? The expectation is Bruno Fernandes stays. It's the same at the moment with Alexander Isak. But if, in the case of Saudi, an absolutely astronomical offer was placed, then it would have to be considered. But I think the key thing with Bruno Fernandes is Manchester United are bottom half of the Premier League. Bruno Fernandes is playing like a top 4 player. Manchester United are in a real transitional phase. Bruno Fernandes is leading by example. So I don't think you can say there is a profile for any amount of money that would replace what Bruno Fernandes brings in terms of the uniqueness of his profile and his leadership. And on the one hand, you could say, if Manchester United's PSR position is tight and Saudi offered in excess of £100 million, you could fund your whole summer window. And if they get Matheus Cunha, you're bringing in a player that can play as a number 10 and thrive in that role. However, if you lose Bruno Fernandes and you were always planning on bringing in Cunha, who can play wide, who can play as a 9, who can play as a 10 as well, then do you need another player? And you need to spend the vast majority of any money you bring in from Bruno Fernandes, even if it's in excess of 100 million, in order to essentially attempt to replace him. So I don't think it's going to be as simple as money will talk and Manchester United will sell just because they need the money. Because remember, the idea of Manchester United is to make 2 quick signings, as they did last summer as well. And they've kind of had a history in the past few windows of doing this. You've had Mount and Onana, for example. And still, I'm told Manchester United can spend roughly 100 million because they know it's a long window, then worry about balancing the books and outgoings. So we're not in a situation where, because Al Hilal want Bruno Fernandes for the Club World Cup, Manchester United will feel pressured to sell quickly and then spend that money on Cunha and Delap if they're successful. They'll spend the money on Cunha and Delap if Cunha and Delap both decide to join. Then they'll worry about balancing the books. So I don't see Manchester United feeling like in the next 2 weeks, because make no mistake, that's when Al Hilal want this deal done. They're going to be forced in any way to sell Bruno Fernandes. And yes, as JT Sports says, a British transfer record would be astonishing business for somebody in their early 30s with 2 years plus a 1-year option left on his contract. But if you feel that Bruno Fernandes can be part of this transition from mid-table mediocrity to back challenging for the Champions League football, remember what you get for qualifying regularly for the Champions League. So you can also make an argument keeping Bruno Fernandes also makes you that 100 million plus, because you get yourself back in the Champions League sooner rather than later. And that's why I sense that Manchester United's position of not for sale is genuine.
Yeah, and I feel that it is. You can tell with the way Ruben Amorim speaks that how important Bruno is. You mentioned there potentially 2 quick signings. The situation with Cunha, to United fans like myself looking in from the outside, it feels like at any moment there could be, the Ornstein bomb or the here we go. Is that a deal that?
Hey, what about the Jacobs bomb? Why are you giving the exclusive to somebody else?
Well, no, what we need to do, we need to find one for you. You've got the Here We Go. There's the
Well, how
Ornstein
about this?
Bomber.
I don't have a catchphrase, but let's not forget that myself and Alex Crook broke the Cunha exclusive.
This is true.
United were serious about him. So I think the story is bigger than the catchphrase. But if in the chat, or if you, Terry, want to go away and find a suitable catchphrase for me, then I'm perfectly willing to.
That's what we need, because that's what we need for the PR, because you were the one, as I say, that broke this news. But still, we live in this, and I mean this with absolute respect to Ornstein and Fabrizio. You still live in this world where, well, until I see it from those two, people still tread on eggshells, and I don't think they should. So, viewers, okay, Terry, respect, but of course I respect Ben. It's why he's here, right? What I want you to do for me, though, is I want you to find a catchphrase. It's got to be like the Ornstein Bomber, the Here We Go. What's Jacobs? And we are going to make Ben's massive. We are going to make it trend, people.
Oh, my Lord.
Get that into the comment section
I'm
right
not even
now.
sure whether or not we're going down a horrible rabbit hole here where I'm going to end up with a catchphrase as bad as this T-shirt. What I would say, though, just as an aside, because I think people like to understand a bit about the process, Fabrizio Romano and David Ornstein are two of the best in the business. And I have so much respect for both of them. They're different kind of journalists, right? Fabrizio is like a non-stop machine, and he does it all off one phone. And I host a podcast with Fabrizio Romano called Market Madness. And every time he comes on, I'm just thinking, wow, because he's Mr. Multitasker. He does everything himself in terms of finding the story, but also kind of like posting it and ideating over the creativity of it all, a bit like you, Terry, as well, in terms of like building this show and this podcast. He's part of everything. And I swear we're going to learn one day a massive scandal about Fabrizio Romano, and that is that he's got an identical twin brother, and all along the twin Fabrizio's been doing the posting and the graphics, and the actual Fabrizio's been calling all the agents. He's probably the most hardworking man I know. And I mean, David Ornstein is like this gold standard, I would say, for young journalists. I've been fortunate enough to cross paths with him as well professionally. And also when I was in communications, working with David as well, when he would make inquiries when I was up in Scotland. And the thing about David is that he spends so much time building personal contacts, which is my big piece of advice to any young journalist, because anyone watching that wants to get into this game, they may think it's about, how do I get that agent's number? Or how do I get in front of that sporting director? But if they don't know you and they don't trust you, then even if you have an in to them, you're never going to get any information out of them. And the worst thing, we all find it in life, is when that one person only contacts you when they want something from you. When you hear from an old uni mate because his team are in a cup final and it's 20 years, and the first thing they ask for is a couple of tickets to the game. So I would say the thing about David Ornstein and others that makes them the best in the business is they think about people first, and they develop personal relationships without the expectation of information, and they get people to like them, and they keep in contact with people, and they become visible, and they become trustworthy, and then the stories follow. And that's why I think, as you alluded to, David is the best in the business, and his process is kind of the key to his success. And I think every other journalist in the business is trying to do exactly the same thing. And if you're young and you're listening and you're looking to get into the business, that's my advice. Don't rush and get impatient about trying to find information. Start with the idea of just developing personal relationships and see where it takes you.
Yeah, listen, you and I have spoken about this before behind the scenes as well. And one thing I always say to people, I respect what Ornstein and Fabrizio have done and the level they've had. I also say to people as well, don't just disregard, I said it for years, other journalists, because I don't even mean this rudely to Ornstein or Romano. They often don't break the news initially. They kind of confirm it later on down the line. And maybe they've earned that right not to take because I always find it's harder for the up and coming journalists who, you're trying to get ahead, you're trying to get noticed, you're trying to get your work out there. You might reveal a story when maybe it's in its fledgling stages, and we know the world can change a lot then, and things go. But we have had someone send one through for you. They said it could be someone's extended on this one, but a big Ben banger could be it. Ben just dropped a banger. Ben just dropped a banger. That could work, you know. Viewers, what do you reckon? A big Ben banger.
Oh Lord! I mean, that could be a response, but there's no way I'm putting my own name into a catchphrase.
I see. Yeah, you can't do that. That's one that people have to do for you. That can't be one you do yourself, I think.
Should we talk about Cunha though?
Yes, let's talk about Cunha. Let's talk about Cunha.
I'm worried people are just going to be like, I don't care about your process. I don't care about your catchphrase. I just want the Cunha news. The thing about Cunha is that when myself and Alex Crook broke the story, we were aware that Cunha and those close to him had held some meetings with Manchester United, and the project had really resonated. And the reason was because he was pitched as a number 10. So if you think about the Newcastle situation, because they'd also had some contact with the Cunha camp, you play 4-3-3, right? So if Joelinton isn't dropped, he's probably not getting into midfield or playing as a defined 10, because Sandro Tonali, Bruno Guimaraes, Joelinton likely to be the three in midfield. And then Cunha's competing against Anthony Gordon and Harvey Barnes, and the latter's on fire, and a fit Gordon probably starts. And then through the centre, Anthony Isak. So the football pitch of Newcastle is a bit harder to persuade Cunha he's going to be playing in a preferred position. Then you have Arsenal, who have always had a bit of division over Cunha and have never really made a meaningful approach. And remember, Andrea Berta signed Cunha to Atleti and sold him to Wolves. So you've got a sporting director there that knows the player and his personality off the field very, very well. And they've not made a meaningful approach. And again, like Newcastle, Arsenal want a defined left winger, such as Nico Williams. Some now say Jamie Gittens, and a few other targets there. And then a defined traditional number 9, Victor Gyokeres, and Alexander Isak, a Benjamin Sesko. And Cunha's neither an old school touchline hunging out and out left winger or a traditional old school number 9. So perhaps not either a fit for Arsenal. So Manchester United have got a much clearer football pitch. And Cunha said yes regarding the pitch. And he's spoken now directly to Ruben Amorim. Then we've heard a lot of reports about agreements in principle and terms being done. And that's still actually ongoing to my knowledge. So that's phase 2. Are Cunha and Manchester United going to be able to agree terms? And the answer is probably yes. But as the time we are live now, maybe it changes this afternoon, later this week. But right now, there's no full agreement over terms. Not because there's stumbling blocks, but because that's the next step. And it simply hasn't been finalized yet. Terms take time, and you don't need to rush it because you've got a release clause. If the player likes Manchester United, you're not necessarily facing particularly heavy competition at this stage. And then the third part is going to Wolves. And as of now, Wolves do not have any formal offer or club that have told them officially they're going to trigger the clause. And Manchester United will look at two options. One is trigger the clause. 2 is dance around the clause a little bit. And Manchester United feel Wolves may be a little bit flexible. So you match the clause, or you slightly better the clause with an additional nominal fee, and then maybe you get slightly more preferable payment terms. But Wolves want Cunha to go. Wolves feel it's the right time. Wolves know he wants another challenge. They've got huge respect for the player, but Wolves want a quick exit. Wolves know that that release clause is roughly market valuation, and Wolves know that there are at least 2 suitors in Newcastle and Manchester United. So the feeling is this will be a quick deal. It might be pre-agreed before the window opens, and there's no doubt that Manchester United are leading the race, but it's step by step. It's a yes to the sporting project. It's an ongoing discussion over terms, and there's no club-to-club contact yet. And let's see whether that changes by the end of this week or mid-May, because I think once the window opens, the first part of the window on the 1st of June, I think by then the end destination of Cunha will be very, very clear, if not official.
Yeah, very exciting times, and personally hope we land him. I think he's an exceedingly talented player, right type of profile. And the age for me is important. United need some experience and players that are ready to go, I feel, straight away. In terms of up front, kind of an overlap here with United and Chelsea. A lot of links saying that Liam, I keep saying Rory, but it's Liam Delap.
Yeah, me too. It's an age thing.
It is an age thing. I keep saying Rory. But Liam Delap, obviously heavily linked to Man United, heavily linked to Chelsea. What is the latest on that deal as far as you're aware, Ben?
Yeah, Liam Delap, as I've said many times, is different to Cunha. So whereas Matheus Cunha doesn't mind about next season and European football, and therefore would join Manchester United with or without Champions League football. Liam Delap is looking for Europe next season, and that may delay his choice of club. It's still going to be a fast deal because this summer Liam Delap goes off to the under-21 Euros, and he wants to know which club he's coming back to after it, or in the case of Chelsea, if he has to recuse himself from that because he prefers to be part of their Club World Cup squad. I think it more likely he'll go and play for England than Club World Cup. And we have to wait and see whether Chelsea are comfortable with that. But Delap's kind of looking at the league table because you've got Chelsea who are in the mix for Champions League football. And if not, Europa League. You've got Newcastle who have already got Europe by winning the League Cup. But again, in the mix for Champions League. And if you think about those two clubs, they're playing each other this weekend. And whoever wins is more likely to get Champions League football. And the loser could potentially be the one that misses out. So if you're Delap, you might think, okay, I'll just wait until that result and it might help inform my decision making. And then you've obviously got Manchester United as well, who really want Delap. But if he likes that project but wants Champions League football, he may have to wait until the end of May. And then people ask me the question, why would it be so important next season specifically for Delap for European football? And I understand that question because we've just spoken about Cunha, long-term project. He's young. Why is he so impatient? Why is it such a deal breaker? The reason is England, because you're heading into a full season in the build-up to the 2026 World Cup. And this is why I sense that Delap will want to go and play for England under 21s over the Club World Cup if Chelsea is the end destination. And as a young player that wants to be selected by Thomas Tuchel, it's more important than ever in 25-26 to Delap that he's playing at a high level domestically and in Europe because he really wants to make that selection. If he's not playing Champions League or European football, it's less games, it's less profile, it's less opportunities to ultimately impress Thomas Tuchel. And that's why next season is so important to Delap. There's a 30 million relegation release clause. It's below his market value. Anyone that signs him is going to trigger that clause in likelihood. And therefore, no real club-to-club negotiation should be necessary with Ipswich Town. So it's just all about the player's final decision. And it's also about the merry-go-round of movement, right? Because he's not the only target for all of these clubs. I think Manchester United, despite reports with Victor Osimhen and Victor Gyokeres, they view Liam Delap as their top and most feasible target. And collectively, if you take 30 million plus Cunha's 62.5 million, it's within Manchester United's budget to do both. They don't have the budget to do Cunha and Gyokeres or Cunha and Osimhen. So this is why Manchester United view Delap at the moment as their most feasible and leading target. But they might have to wait a little bit longer. Chelsea also appreciate Delap. Enzo Maresca knows him very well. But they've got some other names on their list as well, like Benjamin Sesko, Hugo Ekitike, and Victor Gyokeres. And then as far as Newcastle are concerned, perhaps the hardest thing for them is if Isak stays, how much game time is Delap going to get? And that will definitely be a consideration for the player. But Newcastle are very serious about Delap as well. And like Manchester United, would likely need Champions League football in order to pull it off. Although the beauty for Newcastle is they do have some form of European football. So it's quite an open race for Delap. But I think come late May, we'll know what club he's going to, because I don't expect Delap to leave for that under 21 Euros and not have a new club.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. And I understand. I mean, I know that Ruben Amorim has said that any player that only wants to join us because of European football, they're not the right choice for us. And I get that he'll want that standard to be there. But I think in reality, when I take my Man United hat off, players have to consider where they want to be. But at the same time, the reason why I agree with players considering things is because United are going to consider things. If, and we should, with the Williams brothers both being out, if we don't qualify for this Europa League final, there is cause to say we should shut the club down, to be honest. We're then going to be in a European final. You win that, Man United's situation may change, where suddenly we say, do you know what? Gyokeres is, as an example, Gyokeres is possible now. We've got Champions League football and more money. And so we leave Delap with standing there. So if the club, and this is why I think football fans sometimes have got to look at it from both angles. if a club can just change its mind, which happens all the time, why should players be different? Why should a player have to make a snapshot decision on where they want to play now on the 7th of May when that respective club could also change their mind at some point? So I think we have to be open-minded about that as football fans, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, and I think that a player holds all the cards, right? Especially when dealing with Manchester United, because the club's in a mess in the Premier League, its lowest ever finish. Season might be saved by winning the Europa League, but if they don't, and then Champions League isn't part of next season, the entire club remains in a state of transition with not that many bargaining chips, because the Manchester United way is a reduction in wage of roughly 20% in seasons when they don't get Champions League football. There's a tight PSR position. You will have other clubs with Champions League football that can offer higher wages, more money, and give a young player like Delap the opportunity to play on the biggest stage. And when players know they're in demand and know they're the leading choice of more than one club, they're fully entitled to wait. And I think clubs are waiting, let's be clear about this, until the end of the season to finalise their budget. Chelsea know they can be more ambitious if they get Champions League football, the same for Newcastle and obviously Manchester United. So it's really easy to keep putting the player's name into the headlines and say, why have they not made a decision? But some of it is also down to the fact clubs can't always pull the trigger until they know what they've got and what their budget is for the forthcoming season too. So it's not just Delap waiting, it's also Manchester United, Chelsea and Newcastle delaying to an extent because they don't want to overextend until they know what they've got in terms of European football for next season either. So everybody's kind of waiting. And I think when the names come out in late April, the beginning of May, people think, oh, the window's starting, and they kind of rub their hands together. And then you want your daily Cunha and your daily Delap update. But there's a 2-3 week delay now into mid or late May for many of these potential signings, simply because of that point that I make, that the clubs are not ready to sign it off because they want to see where their team finishes. And maybe they will pivot at the last minute and we'll get a few surprises. And the only reason, for example, why Chelsea have been able to declare that Giovanni Quenda for big money is joining is because that's 2 seasons time. So they've allocated that budget. They feel comfortable with their financial situation. But if there was a similar winger joining right now for a similar amount of money to Quenda, and the money had to be put on this financial year or the next financial year, depending on when they sign the player, you might find that Chelsea are not able to get it done that early because they also want to wait and see if they've got Champions League football. So it's kind of a bit of a limbo period now where we all know roughly the direction of travel from our club. We know the positions they want. We know the main names that they're looking at, but very few clubs are willing to actually sign on the dotted line yet until the season ends because there's still so much at stake for all of these clubs in terms of what they may or may not qualify for next season.
Makes perfect sense. On Chelsea, a player they were linked with heavily last summer, seemingly looking like he's going to leave Galatasaray this summer. But where's the likely destination for Victor Osimhen? A lot of us football fans still can't quite believe none of the big European sides are willing to pay the salary that he wants. What is the latest on him, Ben?
Yeah, release clause is 75 million euros, but you've obviously got agent fees and the player still wants a very high wage and a very specific wage that's not necessarily incentive driven. So Chelsea are no closer to Victor Osimhen. We keep hearing links. I'm not actually aware that he's particularly high in their thinking anymore. And part of the reason is because even if Chelsea match the kind of number that Osimhen wants, Osimhen has to agree to Chelsea's structure. And he wants something that's guaranteed and in and around the £250,000 a week mark. And Chelsea are basically saying, as they did last summer, if you want to join us, we can get you to 250k or whatever number you want, but you have to start lower because we've not got Champions League and you have to earn it. You have to get that collective wage via a base that fluctuates and would go up 20% with Champions League. And you then rely on yourself to hit individual goals to get your total package. And Osimhen is basically saying 250k and then some icing on the cake depending on how well he does in terms of things like goal scoring targets and, of course, the overall team performances. So it's not just about the number with Osimhen, it's about the structure, at least regarding Chelsea. And people are wrongly assuming, just because the release clause has gone down to 75 million euros, that Osimhen is somehow more affordable. And that's not really how Chelsea view it at the moment. And the same also for Manchester United. And again, in the last few weeks, and I respect obviously other reports and journalists, we've heard that Victor Osimhen has said yes to Manchester United. Victor Osimhen is firmly on Manchester United's radar. That's again not my understanding. This is not a feasible deal right now unless Osimhen changes not just his wage demands, but the structure that he's looking for and how guaranteed he expects the entirety of the money to be. And he hasn't budged yet, and he didn't budge a year ago, even when he was in limbo. So unless something dramatic changes, then I think we're going to get a situation where it's going to be very difficult for any Premier League club to sign Victor Osimhen. And that really only leaves two suitors. One, Saudi Arabia, the most likely destination at the moment, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Two, PSG, who are definitely going to be in for a number 9. And remember, PSG a year ago did agree terms with Victor Osimhen, so he knows if he wants to stay in Europe. There are clubs like PSG that have said, yes, we'll give you everything you want. But the issue with PSG a year ago was they couldn't agree a fee with Napoli. They bid 80 million euros. Napoli said release clause or nothing. PSG backed off. With PSG, Randal Kolo Muani likely to depart. Marco Asensio in Villa remains one to watch, even though there's no option or obligation to buy. But I think two strikers, or attack-minded players anyway, will leave PSG and they will sign a number 9. And Victor Gyokeres, Victor Osimhen, possibly Benjamin Sesko, all there. I don't think we're going to see PSG come back in and reignite their interest in Marcus Rashford. And obviously for PSG, the opportunity to unite Osimhen with Kvicha Kvaratskhelia is very appealing because they're a proven partnership. So maybe one to watch, but nothing advanced at this point. And obviously PSG are just fully focused on trying to beat Arsenal this evening and then win the Champions League. With Saudi, the main thing we need to stress is that a year or so ago, Osimhen said yes to Saudi. There was no problem between Al Ahly and Osimhen. And Ivan Toney was waiting to complete his medical. And he knew that if Osimhen said yes and Napoli sanctioned the move, Toney would still be playing for Brentford because Osimhen was the top choice. In exactly the same way, by the way, that when Al Nassr lined up Victor Boniface and John Duran, Boniface knew it was agreed in principle, but Duran was the priority and he was left in limbo. So Ivan Toney wanted to join Al Ahly and got his move, but Victor Osimhen was the top choice there. And ever since that move fell through, because De Laurentiis found out about the Toney fee and then went, hang on a minute, if that's 40 million odd, then my player's worth way more than that. And he changed the price. And Saudi dealmakers said, we don't play those games. And they walked away and the deal collapsed. Now Osimhen is cheaper. Saudi may return. And it won't be obviously Al Ahly because they've already got Ivan Toney. But keep an eye on Al Hilal and ahead of the Club World Cup because Osimhen is on their radar. And as I said before, Osimhen already said, yeah, he wants to go to Saudi. The money's too good to turn down. And I think we are going to see in the next maybe 2 to 3 weeks another Saudi push for Osimhen. So I think probably a move outside of the Premier League, unless Osimhen changes his wage demands, is looking like the most likely scenario.
One to watch for sure in what's going to be an epic summer transfer window. Sort of staying with the Chelsea theme, I know he's been linked to a number of clubs, Chelsea, Liverpool, Arsenal in recent days. But Dean Howson of Bournemouth, what is the latest on him and his potential movement this summer?
Yeah, it's an open race. We keep sort of hearing Chelsea are leading, Liverpool are leading, Arsenal are pushing strong. And those are the three clubs. As I've reported for a few weeks now, I'm not aware that Real Madrid have actually upped the ante. Everyone's kind of assuming because of a few social media posts and the fact that Howson is Spanish, that maybe he's waiting for Real Madrid. But I really think it's a 50-50 decision as to whether Real Madrid will actually add a new centre-back. And we know if they do, it might be somebody like William Saliba that they try for, even though Arsenal are quite confident that they can get him to sign a new deal. Bayern have made a few inquiries, but I think a move within the Premier League is looking most likely. And my expectation is this will be one of the first deals that we know about and will likely be done, agreed in principle, before the window even opens for that first 10 days on the 1st of June. Chelsea are certainly pushing hard, and Huijsen is ahead, for example, of Mark Guéhi, and they're prepared to trigger the £50 million release clause. Liverpool are intent on finding a long-term heir to Virgil van Dijk, and Huijsen falls into that category because he likes playing as a left-sided centre-back, but he's just as comfortable and experienced as a right-sided centre-back. So with uncertainty over Ibrahima Konate, you have a situation where he could partner Van Dijk and then one day move across to the left-hand side and end up becoming the eventual replacement. And that is Liverpool's recruitment strategy in a nutshell. Find the young replacement when you've still got the person that they're going to replace. And then you don't have to panic. You don't have holes in your squad. Mamadashvili's coming in. Alisson is still there as the number one. Huijsen could come in. Van Dijk is still there. They could bring in a right-sided attacker, and Salah's still there. And that's a win-win situation because you don't have gaping holes. You don't have panic. You don't have urgency. You don't have need. And Liverpool, by the way, are the best at this. Everyone's celebrating Salah and Van Dijk staying. And I can guarantee you Liverpool are working really hard now to find their replacements. So they come in without you really realizing, because you're still talking about Salah and Van Dijk. And obviously the only flip side to that, when you pitch, is a player like Huijsen will be saying, well, I want to play now. What happens if Konate signs a new deal? Then I want to be part of that Spanish national team for the 2026 World Cup. How much game time am I going to get? From Chelsea's point of view, with Wesley Fofana having injury problems, maybe there's a situation where the Chelsea pitch can be more like you will partner Levi Colwill and Huijsen will feel like he's going to get more game time there. Mm-hmm. So the pitch of minutes, I think, will probably be more important in the race to persuade Dean Huijsen to join, and specifically minutes for next season, than necessarily money. And then with Arsenal, a bit like, I suppose, at Liverpool, how much game time is he going to get is another factor in all of this. Because if you have Saliba and Gabriel, then unless one of them goes, where is the week in, week out Premier League starts unless one of those two players is injured? And that may be a consideration as well. But, you know, I'd love to be able to come on here when we're live now and say, oh, I've got a little bit of intel that says this team or that team in the race for Huijsen is winning the race. And we've heard hundreds of different and conflicting stories from lots of journalists that I respect. My knowledge is genuine. And sometimes you just have to say this as a journalist. You know, everyone expects us to be able to move a story on. I have no idea at the time we are live which of the three teams is genuinely leading the race for Dean Huijsen. I know Chelsea and Liverpool are both particularly confident. And my sources, as I broke 2 weeks ago, even when we heard clamour about Bayern and Real Madrid, have always said that the player will stay in the Premier League. But other than that, it feels like quite an open race.
Comprehensive, a very, very good breakdown. I'm sure Chelsea and Liverpool fans will like hearing that they are confident, but an open race for the brilliant young centre-back, Huijsen. Get your comments in, people. Make sure you're hitting the like button for us this morning. Still staying with Liverpool a little bit. I wanted to get an update from you and understanding on the situation with Alexander Isak. We know Arsenal saw him as a huge target. I did say, I think I saw a report from Ornstein the other day saying he's still on paper the number one target, but very hard. Lots of reports, and you and I have spoken about this at large, that information coming out about Liverpool targets is normally very difficult, but consistent briefings that they're talking to his agents and they're pushing hard for this deal. What's your understanding of the current situation regarding Isak, and how likely at this point is there to be a move to Liverpool Football Club for him?
Yeah, I think Liverpool and Arsenal are the main clubs for Alexander Isak, although I would expect Chelsea to be part of that conversation if he becomes genuinely available for a reasonable price. Again, we're in this limbo period, right, where Newcastle have got all the cards, and even more so if they get Champions League football. He's well paid. He's contracted anyway until 2028. Newcastle's position at the moment is Isak is untouchable. And the first clue will be Liverpool, because if Liverpool bid, they, more than most clubs, never waste their time. So if we hear of a formal Liverpool bid, it will be a clear indication that they think Isak is genuinely available. And that might create a domino effect. If Liverpool back away or sign somebody else, then it will likely be because their market intel tells them there's no point wasting their time. You may remember when everyone was speculating Xavi Alonso's going to replace Jurgen Klopp. Liverpool knew 2 months before all of that speculation started that he wasn't going to leave Leverkusen and that he might hold out for Real Madrid to replace Carlo Ancelotti. So the expertise Liverpool have in reading the market is really the foundation to their success. And everybody will clamor around, why is nobody bid? Why are they not breaking the bank? But actually, in a window, you kind of have to conserve your energy and approach the right targets at the right time. And if Liverpool feel that Newcastle simply are not going to sell, they won't bid and they'll move on to another target. And right now, I think that's the process of determination. My understanding is that it won't just be a British transfer record that it would take to get Isak. It will be a number closer to £150 million. And even then, Newcastle may say, no, we're going to endeavour to extend the player and keep him because he's more valuable to the project than that 150 million. And unlike a year ago, Newcastle's PSR position is much stronger. So I don't see them needing a massive sale, 70 to 100 million pounds, like they were looking for 12 months ago when they were forced to sell Minter to Brighton and Elliot Anderson to Nottingham Forest. So there will be speculation over Isak, but I find it quite telling at this point that Liverpool and Arsenal have both got other targets. And we know Andrea Berta really likes Victor Gyokeres. We know that Liverpool have got Hugo Ekitike and João Pedro, to name but two, on their list. And they've both scored very highly when Liverpool have ran the data on each of them. So I come back to what I said before. Isak is a dream target for Liverpool and for Arsenal, but neither are going to waste their time unless they feel he becomes genuinely available. And we won't know the answer to that question until we understand whether or not Newcastle have qualified for the Champions League next season. And if they do, then to keep Isak, my feeling, speaking to sources, is that they'll then have to engage with the player in order to further reward him, even though he'll get a wage packet increase anyway if Newcastle finish in the top 5.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. We've had a number of conversations about this on the terrace, and again, from a fan perspective, and Newcastle, like, no, he said he wants to be a club legend. The club says he's not for sale. It can't happen. Equally, as you say, I feel Liverpool, especially if they knew right now that it was genuinely was impossible, I think they would brief their journalists and say it's not a target for us. Liverpool don't like to be connected to players that they know they're not going to buy.
They did it with Jude Bellingham.
Yeah, exactly. So I look at it as, I agree with you 100%. It's my reading of, as just a fan reading the stories, when you read the body of work, it's possibly he leaves, it's possibly stays, and it could be an epic race indeed. And that's why, at the same time, they're looking at other targets, these teams, because they know how difficult it is. And yeah, a lot might change in the next few weeks, but watch this space, I suppose, on this one. You mentioned Gyokeres there. A few weeks back, a lot of talk of him joining Arsenal, leading the race. The deal could be close. United's name's come up again a little recently. Other attackers linked to Arsenal, the Dortmund forward Gittens. In relation to Arsenal and their pursuit of strikers and attackers, what's the latest in terms of your understanding at the Emirates?
Yeah, Victor Gyokeres and still Benjamin Sesko, by the way, very high in Arsenal's thinking. And Gyokeres is going to go this summer and not for his release clause, as I reported in January. And it's still my understanding now, the number that Sporting will sanction is in the region of 70 million euros, which is a real bargain for a player that's been on fire this season. And Andrea Berta has obviously come in and has got kind of a win now brief. So remember, Arteta and Edu, it was all about a 5-year project. It was all about bringing talents through. It was all about developing talents. And then in the last 18 months or so, it's been about tying down what you've got. And then we know that they spent big money on Declan Rice and Kai Havertz. But Berta's brief is, we're inheriting a 5-year project now. So we need instant success. And that's why I think an established, proven player like Gyokeres, who's played in England as well, is going to be somebody that Berta feels can hit the ground running, because Arsenal haven't got time in this project anymore to say this is a superb talent, but maybe they need 2-3 seasons to kind of get going. And if you go for Isak, you get somebody that can instantly get you 20 plus goals. And I think Arsenal feel the same about Gyokeres. And that's maybe the only question mark over Benjamin Sesko, who's the perfect kind of profile for Arsenal. And we know that they're inquired to see whether anything might be possible mid-season in January. But if you line up those three in an Arsenal team and you rank them as who would get the most goals next season, I think you'd say Isak guaranteed to get 20 plus, simply because he's doing it season on season for Newcastle in the Premier League. Gyokeres, you'd be very confident that he could get well beyond 15 plus goals in his first season at Arsenal in the Premier League. And Sesko might need a little bit more time. So that might be why Sesko falls a bit further down the pecking order. But make no mistake, he's a contender there. And I think with Gyokeres, it's still more likely that Arsenal will move than Manchester United. People want to make the link, right, between Ruben Amorim and Gyokeres, but Manchester United have to be able to afford that deal. And still, I'm told, as I said right at the top of the show, that Delap is the number 1 target for Manchester United. If he goes elsewhere, let's see what they pivot to. But it's going to be difficult for Manchester United to get both Cunha and Gyokeres early in the window. And Gyokeres is another one that I expect to move quickly, because Sporting not only want clarity over his future, but they want to be able to spend that money on finding a replacement. Then, as you say, you've got the left side, maybe Gittens. In addition to that, Nico Williams is still under consideration, and more so than a player like Cunha. And I explained that earlier in the show, so I won't kind of repeat myself. There's a very marketable release clause of 58 million euros, but a bit like Zubimendi, the Williams' love for Athletic Bilbao is so strong that you got to persuade the player to leave, and he's on really good money there as well, around 200,000 euros a week, and you'd have to better that pay packet too. But Arsenal are definitely in the mix for Nico Williams, and Barcelona love the idea in theory of reuniting the international pairing of Nico Williams and Lamine Yamal on either side of their flanks. So they're not to be discounted, but obviously Arsenal are in a stronger financial position. Zubimendi, I'm told, is pretty much agreed in principle. So I'll be surprised if May ends and we don't hear that Zubimendi is an Arsenal player. Internally at Arsenal, they basically think that one's done. And the caution around maybe letting slip that that's the case is just the fact that Liverpool thought it was done as well. And then the player woke up one morning and had a change of heart, right? So until it's signed, Arsenal are super cautious. But in terms of the contract length, the terms, the payment around the clause or specifically triggering the clause, all of that Arsenal feel is kind of there and ready to go. And it's kind of just a case of saying, okay, let's get this signed. But until it is signed, there's that slight worry the player could just wake up and go, actually, I've changed my mind. But I think we've got a very high percentage chance of, in the next few weeks, Zubimendi being confirmed as an Arsenal player right at the beginning of the summer window. They look like they're going to lose out on Naipan to Aston Villa. So maybe another midfielder, a young profile, comes in. But remember, at this stage, it looks like Thomas Partey will now stay and only Jorginho will leave from the midfield and go off to Flamingo. You've got a left back or maybe a defender who can play left back, centre back. And it'll be kind of interesting to see what direction Arsenal go here. If they reignite interest in Joral Hato and may face competition from Chelsea. and that's a player that can play left back, centre back, or whether they try and rival Liverpool for like a Milos Kerkas, because Zinchenko and Tierney both expected to leave. And then you get more of a defined overlapping left back. But I think Arsenal are maybe more inclined to go centre back, left back, and have like a hybrid player similar to Calafiori. And that's where Hato may come into their thinking. We know they're looking at Dean Howson as well as a more defined centre back. So already we're talking almost about an entire spine of a team. And then a number 2 goalkeeper too. And I would keep an eye on Joan Garcia as one option. And they might face competition from potentially Manchester United, although there's nothing advanced there. And also Atletico Madrid if Jan Oblak finally ends up leaving the club. So Arsenal are going to be in, like Liverpool, for a very significant and high spending window. And I think they're going to strengthen in a variety of areas, but certainly attack, wingers, defence, number 2 goalkeeper, possibly another midfielder in addition to Zubimendi if that one does get over the line. So Berta's basically going to be bringing in a whole new spine of a team.
Yeah, I love what you said earlier, and I think that what Berta said, that he know, even though he isn't part of the last 5 years, he knows that he has got to deliver instant success because he understands what he's walking into. And I think that will be music to the ears of Arsenal fans, that it isn't okay. Well, this by this kid, this by this youngster, this by this new version of Lokonga, and see what he turns into. Let's take a risk with a Fabio Vieira. I think Arsenal fans will be very, very pleased to hear that you say that. And for me, someone who's taken a lot of time in the last 5 to 6 years to look at the way clubs are run, as probably more so than I did 10 years ago, it's important to understand the evolution of a club, that not everybody's in the same starting point. They're not all a monolith. They're not all in the same situation. And it does appear that Arsenal have kind of woken up to that, which I know their fans have been frustrated with. You mentioned Zubimendi. I did see a report this morning from Spain that it's unlikely Real Madrid will go for him, but there are a number of other reports that Alonso wants him, Real Madrid are going to push. Are you getting any kind of credible noise that Real Madrid could scarper this deal for Arsenal very late on?
Well, not yet. And obviously, part of the caution for Arsenal, as it was for Liverpool, is that there can be a twist. But let me make one thing clear. Martin Zubimendi is in love with Real Sociedad. So this idea that if Real enter the race, he would definitively go, great, I'm going to stay in Spain and move to Real. There are some cultural advantages that Real will have, because the player may say, I like Spain, I like the weather, I like the language, I'm closer to my family. But the downside for Real is, does he want to put on another shirt in La Liga? And if he says, okay, I'm going to stay in La Liga, maybe he just says, okay, I'll stay at Sociedad, where he's very well paid and he's extremely happy. And that, at the crux of it, is the kind of challenge for Real Madrid, that it may be easier for the player, if he is to finally leave Sociedad, to move to another country. And I think Real do kind of sense that. So there's no guarantee that Real spend big money on a midfielder this window. And right now, they've made no approach to Martin Zubimendi. So if Arsenal are quick and can get that signature and that definitive yes, that 95% likelihood of a deal to 100% and formalized, then there'll be no surprises. What you say about Xabi Alonso is true. He does really appreciate Martin Zubimendi, but he's not yet the Real Madrid manager. The likelihood is that he will be. The expectation is Carlo Ancelotti is going to Brazil. The number 1 candidate to replace him is Xabi Alonso. But Real are not the kind of club to go, what does the manager want? He has autonomy. Let's go and get it. There will be a pre-existing recruitment plan in place. And if they wanted Martin Zubimendi, you would have thought that they would have had to already make some kind of significant move, knowing that Arsenal are relatively close. So until something is signed, especially with Zubimendi, I would always be a little bit cautious, because we've had so many twists and surprises with Zubimendi.
Yeah.
But right now, and I can only speak of now, Real haven't approached him. Real haven't made a move. Real have no player contact, no club-to-club contact, no negotiation. If Alonso comes in and if he leans on the recruitment team and if they find the budget and if they decide to enter the race, we're going to get a surprise. But none of that's happened now. So Arsenal still have the Zubimendi situation in their control. Liverpool also haven't reignited their interest either. And this is, again, as I said before, why the Arsenal perspective is that they think this deal is pretty much done. And the only caution is the fact that
it's not actually signed. Yeah.
Left people hanging before. So you just got to now go and get it signed. And that is one of Berta's first tasks. And I think we will know Zubimendi's next destination very early in this summer window, because Arsenal are not just advanced. They've basically got everything in place, bar a medical, but the player has to go, all right, give me the pen. And that hasn't happened yet.
Makes a lot of sense. Viewers, give us your views, give us your opinions on that in the comments section below. I was looking at the timestamps and I wrote PSG may join PSG. I change that. This here says Chelsea have the Club World Cup right after the season. Shouldn't they be faster? Yeah, look, maybe. But look, there's going to be a little window open then. No one's going to complete all their business in that 2 to 3 week window. That's just not going to happen, no matter how fast you operate, Nazir. They may get someone in, because there was a report about Trent to Real Madrid that with Liverpool, they're willing to offer Liverpool a little bit of money to get that deal done sooner rather than waiting for his contract to expire. But yeah, Chelsea are never going to get all these signings done before that point. But
no, but they might, Terry, get some. I mean, the Chelsea perspective generally, and it's a good point by Nasser, is they want to get their business done fast and early and pre-agreed, because they know this summer is really atypical. And they're going to go, in likelihood, if all goes according to plan on Thursday against Djurgården, to a Europa Conference League final on May the 28th, and then 5-6 days off, and then immediately out to America. And then again, if all goes according to plan, it's a 6-week Club World Cup, and then you're back by mid-July, and the Premier League season will start 3 or 4 weeks later. So this is why Chelsea did Quenda and Osogu. And remember, Dario Osogu, the midfielder, comes in this summer, Quenda in 2026. And I still expect Chelsea to try and get a number 9, a centre-back, and a right-footed left winger. And it would not at all surprise me, it's just my personal opinion, if at least 2 of those 3 are signed before the World Cup or very early in June. Now, like I said earlier in the show, if Chelsea win the race for Dean Howson, they'll get him early. If Chelsea choose to go for Delap and succeed, they'll get him early. The likes of Jamie Gittens, maybe Alejandro Garnacho, because if Man United reluctantly sell because it's pure profit, they'll want that money in early so they can fund their window. So I feel like Chelsea have got options that they can do early. They won't treat the early part of the window and the 1st to the 10th of June as its own deadline and rush for the sake of it to bring players in for the Club World Cup. But I would certainly be shocked if that 1st to the 10th of the window in June closed and Chelsea had 0 new faces in before the World Cup. That would be a surprise to me. So I do think they're going to be active, and I do think we're going to get a flurry of names in by several clubs in this 1st to the 10th of June. You've got the Saudi market. They've taken the exceptional window, so they can make signings between the 1st and the 10th of June as well. Al Hilal are definitely going to bring in a marquee signing too. So strap in, really, because that 1st to the 10th of June period of the window is going to be very atypical and particularly active.
Makes a lot of sense. AMT, if Arsenal want Nico Williams, he must perform against Man United. I know you've got wink emojis, and listen, I don't like any player being injured, but the fact their 3 best attackers are all out, I am filled with a little bit of a warm feeling that Man United might go through to the next round. But of course, I wish the Williams brothers and the other attacker, Sachet, I think it's pronounced. I wish them all the very best, and I hope they make very, very speedy recoveries. In terms of managers, Ben, there's obviously going to be some changes. There always is changes when it comes to managers, but most people expect Big Ange to leave regardless of
Mm.
the European results. I've seen Areola, I've seen Glasner, I've seen more recently Silva, Marco Silva linked to the Spurs job. What's your understanding regarding the Spurs and the manager merry-go-round that could take place this summer?
Yeah, as I reported a few weeks ago, my understanding on Ange Postecoglou is it's not win the Europa League or bust. It's a case of if Spurs can get Champions League, that massively changes their summer and their project, but it doesn't necessarily definitively guarantee Postecoglou will stay in a job. He could win a trophy in his second season, and a big one. He could qualify for Champions League football, and he could still leave. And I think that is still the current direction of travel, that even if he gets to the final and wins it, he could still go. And then you look at the names, and Andoni Iraola has been high in Tottenham's thinking, but is more likely, I'm told, to stay at Bournemouth. You've got Oliver Glasner. Yes, you've got Marco Silva as a potential option as well. And then Edin Terzic might come into the thinking as well, because it's possible, not definite yet, but there's potential that Fabio Paratici will permanently rejoin the club. Talks are ongoing. And I think Paratici is inclined to put Terzic forwards, whereas at the moment, most of the other names have Premier League experience. We can even add Thomas Frank into Tottenham's thinking as well. So Frank, Silva, Glasner, Iraola, all Premier League experience. And then Terzic, if he enters the race for a Spurs vacancy, should one materialise, that's kind of the odd one out. And that might be a little bit of the Paratici influence. And there's a big question mark also over the future of Scott Munn. So that's the Spurs situation. Then, as I exclusively revealed now 5 days ago, Marco Silva and Nuno at Nottingham Forest are two names on the list to take over as the new Al Hilal boss. And I think there's a concrete possibility that Silva could leave Fulham. He's no closer to signing a new deal. Al Hilal's quite an interesting one because they've sacked Jorge Jesus, and of course they need a big name manager in time for the Club World Cup. Their first game is against Real Madrid. The number one choice is Simone Inzaghi, but Inter in a Champions League final, Inter challenging for Serie A, into themselves in the Club World Cup. So I think it quite difficult to get Inzaghi in time for the Club World Cup, because he's not going to want to be negotiating over his future weeks before a Champions League final, fighting on a domestic front, when he himself is preparing also for the Club World Cup. And I sense that Al Hilal are not going to wait for Inzaghi until after the Club World Cup, because it's very important to them that a marquee name is in charge and they have stability from the very early part of the summer. So if Inzaghi says no, I think it quite likely that Silva will become the leading candidate. And I'm told he is open to Saudi, and there has already been some negotiation. So Silva's maybe more likely to actually go to Saudi than necessarily to Spurs. And he's had a Saudi offer in the past that he turned down. Let's see whether anything changes this time around. But just keep an eye on Al Hilal and Marco Silva, because that one could develop over the coming days or the coming weeks. And then just a final word also on Glasner. Again, yes, appreciated by Spurs, but he's also the leading candidate at the moment for Leipzig. And Crystal Palace are quite fearful that he may have his head turned by that particular opportunity. You've got Cesc Fabregas on the list, but I think he'll stay at Como. You've got Danny Roll at Sheffield Wednesday, who's also liked by Southampton and Leicester City. And I expect Roll to leave Sheffield Wednesday for somebody. I've got no intel yet as to whether it will be for a championship club, it will be abroad. He's also got a chance to move to Saudi himself. So there's a few different options there for Roll. But Glasner to Leipzig, one to watch. Silva to Al Hilal, one to watch. Ange Postecoglou's successor, one to watch as well. We are going to get a flurry of managerial movement in the coming weeks or in the early part of the summer. And I sort of sense that the domino effect will be defined by three things. One is obviously Ancelotti leaving Real Madrid, but Alonso's pretty clear cut to go there at this stage. I've never really got a sense from sources that Jurgen Klopp is a genuine contender. 2 is obviously Spurs and a quick end of season review off the back of if they do or don't get Champions League football. And then do names like Glasner, Silva, do they wait and see if there's a Spurs vacancy? Or do Al Hilal put pressure on? Do Leipzig put pressure on? And does that mean that names like Silva and Glasner potentially make their decision before they even know if there's a Spurs vacancy? And that's another plot line to keep an eye on as well. So it's going to be as interesting to see which managers move early in the window as which players do so.
Thank you very much for the update there. Viewers, listen, appreciate you all being here this morning. We'll be having Ben on the terrace and on the Done Deal show regularly over the summer, as we always do for the past 3 to 4 years. Let everyone know, I know obviously you're killing it over at Give Me Sport. Good friends of mine over there. See you on Talk Sport all the time as well. So where can people find you later today if they want to catch up with more news?
Yes, thanks for the plugs. Gimme Sport, where I'm a senior football correspondent. That's most of my writing. Talk Sport, live actually in 15 minutes time. So make sure you tune in there. I carry a couple of titles for Talk Sport as a transfer correspondent and as a Middle East correspondent, which is where I cover a lot of the Saudi football. I'm a Premier League commentator there as well for their international feed. And then obviously all of my usual social places at Ben David Jacobs on Instagram and at Jacobs Ben on X, because still some nemesis who took Ben Jacobs' handle on X when it was formerly Twitter, seemingly about 15 years ago, has maintained my name the right way around, even though they don't have a profile photo. They don't have any followers. They only follow one person. They've not posted since 2012, and yet I cannot get my name the right way round on X. So I will forever be Jacobs Ben.
Lovely. Listen, Norway news. I can't pronounce it. Knutsen. To replace Frank. I'll have to, Harold, I know you. I'll have to research who that is. I don't know who that is. Ben might. I'll take a little
top
look.
Manager, by the way, and you never know. But obviously, we have to understand if Thomas Frank, assume that is Thomas Frank we're speaking about. Apologies if it's a different Frank, but I'm not so sure Frank will definitively leave, and therefore there probably isn't an advanced list of candidates yet in case there's a departure there. But if I get any update on that, I'll let you know.
Lovely. Listen, tune in to us again next week for more of Big Ben's bangers. We'll see you all later. Peace.